Hi folks, this is the lecture for Chapter 2 Economic Systems and the Circular Flow, and the PowerPoint for this is available on the Canvas site right next to where you're watching this video. Alright, first things first, economic systems. These are what nations use to make choices, to balance their scarcity and their needs and their wants and all those things. It's kind of like in your survival simulation. When you had those resources, you kind of became your own little nation to decide what you were going to do with them. So it's how nations make their choices in order to use their natural resources, their human capital, their entrepreneurial resources, those four factors of production. The three questions that they need to answer are what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. And these should sound familiar to you because they're the same ones that you had to answer in your survival activity. You had to tell me what were you going to make, how were you going to make it, and who was going to get the stuff when you were done. A nation answers these questions through its economic system, and how it answers them tells us what kind of economic system it has. Traditional economies are the most basic. They answer the three basic questions by using and looking at their customs and past traditions. Usually these are based on society's values, and roles are generally passed down. So if your grandfather was a fisherman, your father was a fisherman, what do you think you're going to do? You're probably going to be a fisherman as well. These still exist in limited forms in parts of North America, Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Usually places where they're not necessarily tied to the global economy. Command economies are the next kind of economic system. And in this kind of economic system, the government officials answer the three basic questions of what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. Sometimes they're called central planners, and these don't exist in a pure form anymore. Soviet Union was probably close to it. China's communist, but more communist in government than in economic system today. Market economy or free market is the next kind. This is where individuals answer the three basic questions. We see a free exchange of goods and services in the market, and individuals can buy from whoever they want to. They can sell whatever they want to within reason. And what drives this kind of economic system is self-interest and incentives. So self-interest is when the government is not involved in the economy. The market is driven purely by self-interest. So what makes me happy is what I'm going to do. So if I want to make fluffernutter sandwiches and sell them on the roadside, I'm able to do that because it makes me happy. And if someone wants to buy them, great. And if they don't have to buy them either. But no one's telling me how to make them or what to do with my time. And an incentive is a way to encourage behaviors. We talked a little bit about them last week. They're positive and negative incentives. So if the government doesn't want you to do a certain activity, they might charge a tax on it. If they want more people to engage in a certain activity, they might give some kind of tax break on it, like alternative fuel cars, things like that. They give a tax break and a positive incentive. Mixed economies are a combination of one of those three other basic forms of economic system. So it's an element of one and an element of another. And they fall into three main categories: authoritarian socialism, capitalism, and democratic socialism. Authoritarian socialism is the closest to the pure command model that we have. Government officials set up long-range plans for the economy. They dictate, hence the authoritarian. They tell everybody what's going to happen. An example would have been Cuba at the time that this was made. It's probably not relevant as much anymore. They're opening up a little bit more, but it's where the government sets out the plan and they answer the questions for everybody. Capitalism is closest to the market model that we have. It's where individuals own the factors of production. They answer the three basic economic questions. The government may enact some regulations, but overall it has limited involvement. If you think about our economic system, the government does get involved in things like the Pure Food and Drug Act, collecting sales taxes, manufacturing standards, things like that. But for the most part, we're able to do what we want. If we want to start a business, we can. And if we want to close that business, we can. And as consumers, we can choose from a plethora of stores to buy things from. And then democratic socialism is kind of in between communism and capitalism, if we were to think about it on a spectrum. The government owns some of the factors of production, generally limited key industries, and then individuals are able to make their choices with the other industries. Examples of this would be France and Sweden. So maybe The light company is owned by the government, or the water company is owned by the government. Those are basic necessities that the government may choose to control. Or maybe it's gasoline production or oil production in an oil-rich nation, and they control that industry, but all the other industries are up for free choice. There are 6 major goals for an economy. And by setting goals, a nation can choose how to allocate their scarce resources. So depending on what their goal is, that's going to help them make those choices of scarcity and using their resources efficiently and using them fully. So there are 6 major goals: efficiency, equity, freedom, growth, security, and stability. So depending on how they rank them is going to depend on what kind of choices they're making. Nations may not prioritize the goals in the same way, even though they share the same economic system, and that may be because their priorities are assigned due to scarcity. Maybe they change over time. Maybe there's conflicting priorities, and it's how to balance that. And sometimes the solutions to the priority that they have can, be a problem and cause conflict there. Capitalism, also known as a free market system, the basic idea here is that the producers are free to make whatever the consumers want. Consumers are influenced solely by their desire to fulfill their wants in making purchases in that economic system. Private property, we all own private property in some economic systems. That's scarcer, or our choices to fulfill our private property don't exist. There's open opportunity in a capitalist economy, meaning I can open a business if I want to, or I can choose not to. So no one's restricting me on whether I have the ability to do that. We also have something called legal equality, and that producers and consumers are equal in the eyes of the law, and there's laws protecting both. We have free contract as individuals and citizens in a capitalist economy, that we can engage into a contract with anyone that we want to at any time. And there's profit motive, which is one of the major motivating factors of all producers, is that they can make money. That's the goal of being a producer, is to make money. So the profit motive. The private property is fundamental to capitalism, right to exchange that property voluntarily. We can do whatever we want with our stuff. So if we want to sell it, buy it, do whatever, throw it away, we have the ability to do that. Open opportunity. Everyone can compete in the market, their own free choice, their own abilities dictating what they do. Legal equality. Everyone's the same economic rights. Free contract, voluntary exchange to work. So if you choose to work for someone or not work for them, that's up to you. And the profit motive, that's the incentive that encourages people to improve their material well-being by seeking to gain from economic activities. Competition exists to offset the drive to earn profits, and profit is what's left over after any expenses are paid. So it's taking your total revenue, subtracting any of your costs, and it's what you have left over. That's your profit. And some examples of that kind of highlight the freedom of choice that we have in a capitalist economy are these kind of meaningless things that we see people come up with. The idea of pet rocks in the 70s, where it was literally a little rock in a box, and you didn't have to do anything with it to keep it alive. Tamagotchi pets, where you had little digital pets where you had to feed them and take care of them. Silly bands were a craze a few years ago, Beanie Babies as well. And they're kind of, you can find them anywhere now at Goodwill's for very cheap, but years ago they were very rare and sought after. So you can see how in our capitalist economy we have freedom of choice to produce, consume whatever we want to. Product market and the factor market are the 2 elements of our economic system structure that allow the free flow of goods and services between the 2 elements of our economy. So the product market is the market where goods and services are made, and the factor market is where the factors of production are consumed and sold. So these are the market for the factors of production. The circular flow model is our next model. Our first model that we looked at was the production possibility curve. This circular flow model shows the exchange of goods and services from various groups: government, producers, and consumers. And there is a link here for you to watch Jody the Econ Girl explain the circular flow model, and I'll explain it more fully in class tomorrow as well, if you can't get to the Jody the Econ Girl, the video. Government's role in capitalism, they play a limited role. There's the public sector and the private sector in our economic system. And how do we decide who produces the goods or services? So if all the costs are borne by and all the benefits go to the buyer and the seller, then it is considered a private sector or free enterprise sector. If people who are not part of the interaction benefit or pay, then there's a market failure and the government needs to step in, and that would be a public sector thing. So if there's ever any time where the government feels like people are either being hindered by or benefiting some transaction that they are not directly involved in, so like pollution is a huge one, then the government may step in to clean that up. Public goods are created when a market failure exists. These are goods and services provided by the government and consumed by the public as a group. They're funded by taxes. They have two characteristics. People cannot be excluded from consuming them, and one person's use of the product does not reduce its usefulness to others. So think about sidewalks. Sidewalks are put in most cities by the town through taxes. Two people can be walking on the sidewalk, and they're both going to be able to use it the same way it's supposed to be used for, and no one can be told they can't walk on the sidewalk because it's there. No one can be excluded from using it. That would be an example of a public good. Public goods also exist sometimes because there's free riders that would take advantage of those, and those are just people who choose not to pay for a good or service, but who still benefit from it when it's provided. So maybe that's like the fireworks display where maybe you have to pay $1 to get into it, but you live a block away and you benefit from it and not have to pay the $1 to get into it. Infrastructure is another term that we use in looking at public goods, and those are goods and services that are necessary for the smooth functioning of society. So highways, water systems, sewer systems. Sometimes they're public and private ventures. Sometimes they're public venture and then maybe they're sold to private industry to maintain, like toll roads. An externality is a type of market failure and is a side effect of a transaction that affects someone other than the producer and the consumer. And the government tries to manage these. Like I said, pollution is a negative externality because we don't immediately, we don't have any transaction. We're not in that transaction between, let's say, Staley's, the producer, and the corn syrup of which they're making, but we are a bystander to that, and that we have to smell that pollution or we have to deal with the pollution in our area. And that's it. If you want to view this again, go right ahead, and the PowerPoint's there as well. We'll talk more about these details in class.